Our speaker today, Jonathan Mackay, is a partner at Path, and he leads the Technology and Research Department. He has created and delivered unique and effective growth programs for both national and international organizations. With a comprehensive approach to employee and customer experience, Jonathan helps clients develop customized metrics to create benchmarks, increase engagement, and evaluate program impact. He's a frequent speaker on data-driven growth strategies, and he has executed more than 100 training sessions for organizations across the nation. And he's going to be talking about work, what it means, and redefining work. Please welcome Jonathan Mackay.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you. First, I'd like to thank Ken and Scott for having me. This is actually the first presentation I've done since the pandemic started, so I got to say what a pleasure it is to be back in front of people speaking again. And that's actually where I'd like to start the discussion today. It's almost odd to think now that it's almost been 2 years since the pandemic started. It almost feels like this new normal has just been how it's been. But thinking back, especially in the context of work, I want to ask a few questions. Because we're going to be talking about trends that didn't necessarily start during this pandemic, but have certainly accelerated. How many of you knew somebody who would have said they might have been overworked before this pandemic? How about stressed out, burnout, didn't like their job? The list goes on. All things that were happening before the pandemic, but now, with the pandemic, have only accelerated. You throw technology into the mix, having complicated things, and then, of course, customer expectations are similarly rising. And I actually had a bit of a microcosm of this yesterday. I was flying back from the Outer Banks, and of course, I had an early flight. The flight got delayed, eventually canceled. Long story short on that, I got here. But there was a moment where I was in line, waiting to speak to the agent. And all these trends we're talking about today were just right there in front of my face. First of all, this is a small airport. So, the type of one that has a terminal, 6 gates, all in one room. It was packed, right? Everybody's coming back. The economy is starting to roar back in a lot of ways. Demand is skyrocketing again. We were in line and there was only 2 people at the front desk. Not only trying to do rebookings, but book in new people, take baggage. And you could see that they were understaffed. You could see the customers getting frustrated. And I sat there in awe and watching this lady just masterfully manage this, right? Directing people, calming down customers, getting people through the line. And it just made me think how important, what do we as organizations have to do to ensure that we are able to continue delivering those experiences for people? Because that lady isn't going to be around forever, right? Who's next? How do we prepare for people for this new workplace that is only getting harder? Work has not gotten easier since the pandemic started. As a matter of fact, it's gotten more complicated in many ways. And so it's about understanding what's different, what we as a society, as a community, and as businesses and individuals need to do different to really redefine the future of work. So I want to start with some data. I know there's a lot on this slide. The type isn't exactly large, so I'll read some of this for you. So there's a headline here. Simply put, not only is it getting more competitive, demand's going up, expectations are rising, but there's fewer people to do less jobs, and the jobs that are available are changing. So first, as we know, there are already existing trends in remote work, e-commerce, and automation, but that's accelerated. Now, there's estimated about 25% of the workforce not only maybe wants to, but has to reconsider a new position, even those who may have been doing it for years and years. As of March 2021, 19 million Americans filed for some form of jobless benefits. This despite a record number of over 7 million, and it's actually 9 million job openings now. The key statistic here, though, is this LFPR, labor force participation rate, because some people might say, jobless benefits, stimulus, certainly part of it. But if you look a little deeper, you can see that this LFPR has dropped to the lowest levels we've seen since the recession of the mid-1970s. And that's people who are actually dropping out of the workforce. Partly COVID related, it drove an additional 1.1 million people from the labor market. More than 4 million people have said they're not working due to fear of getting or spreading coronavirus, census data. And then 6.8 million people said they were caring for children who weren't in school or daycare. And I wonder what the additional number would be for people caring for parents and elders and other side of that. So almost more than 10 million of that 19 million has nothing to do with job benefits or any of that. It has to do with the circumstances in our lives. Then lastly, the baby boomer generation, one of the largest demographics ever in the history of our country, are now retiring at a faster clip than they ever have before. On average, it used to be about 2 million. Last year, it rose 50% to 3 million. The baby boomer generation totally shifted how we looked at the workplace. Just hire more people. There's always more people to hire. That has also shifted. So when you see now, it's not simply, people don't want to work, they're lazy, jobs are getting harder, there's less people in the workforce, competition is increasing, and demand is rising. So we're almost at a perfect storm here in the labor market, which requires us to step up, to rethink how we're approaching this. So there's three things, there's many things we could spend our time talking about today. This is a very complicated subject, but I want to highlight three things that we as a society, as businesses and individuals just simply can't ignore. First and foremost is this skills conversation. How can we help people navigate this very rapidly changing environment to adapt and grow in the workplace? The technical term's actually called reskilling, but it didn't go as well with my redefined theme, so we're going with redefined skills. Redefining culture by building trust with people that organizations' main purpose isn't just to maximize profits. Hey, there's nothing wrong with making money, but it has to be about a little bit more than that. And then lastly, how can we redefine the actual workspace, the physical workplace that we use by shifting the focus from where we work to when and why we work? So we'll talk about each of these. So first, redefining skills. Some more stats for you here. The impact of technology is massive. There's almost no position that is not feeling that pull. Customer service, manufacturing, what have you. A few stats, the number of jobs lost to automation by 2030 is set to reach 73 million, and 20 million of those will be in the manufacturing space. And workers see this, right? This isn't a secret. 37% of workers are worried they'll lose their job due to automation. They don't know their path forward. How am I going to compete and work in this new world? The nature of work is fundamentally changing. AI, automation, machine learning is changing things like customer service, manufacturing, logistics, to be less moving something from here to there and pressing buttons and interacting with systems. And then lastly, cloud and that environment, it's no longer about sitting around hardware and computers and desktops. Everything will be mobile-based. It's a new world. And I thought I'd make this a little personal, because I've experienced this in my work life. So I started out in business development. I've been doing what I've been doing now for about 12 years. Just during the pandemic, I switched to more of a technology role. And this is a list of systems I use in my day-to-day operations. 14 different platforms, both desktop and mobile. And this is just for me, right? One person in my organization, each with their own unique thing. Everything from basic Windows all the way down to cloud platforms and surveys and CRMs. I mean, the acronyms are endless. And this was challenging. Where do you spend your time? You start looking at this, there's so many different routes somebody could take in this. How do I know as to what's going to lead me to the place I need to go? Fortunately, being a partner, right, I could apply it to specific use cases in my business, but this is overwhelming to anybody. It was to me when I first looked at it. I said, oh my gosh, how much time is this going to take? What skills do I even need to learn to accurately do this? And if it's happening with me, with all the resources I have, the time, the flexibility, imagine how others are feeling who are just now entering this. But there is a solution, and it's this work-learning integration. And we use the theme of ignoring because I think historically, when we've been running employee engagement surveys, for example, most organizations, they want 10 years of experience, master's degree. They want the perfect candidate. They want someone who can show up day one, hit the ground running. The fact is that person is not there, or you're just going to have to pay top dollar for it. So this is essential. And again, it's not just on the businesses to figure this out. How are we empowering our children with coding classes, programming, learning softwares, personal finance. I mean, the list is endless. So there's obviously many online self-learning tools, credentialing tools that talk about incremental credentialing or embedding credentials into academics or work environments. But there's also, on the other side of things, I love this example. We have a client here in town. Many of you probably know them. They're in the trades, right? This is all well and good when you're talking about software, but not everybody does that, right? There's trades, there's manufacturing, there's actually having to do things. They actually built a house in their warehouse so that they could find employees with little to no experience and train them exactly how they wanted to do. In this house, with all the various equipments, they ran their own program. They did it themselves because that was what set them up, and their results speak for themselves because they're doing very well. So I know we're supposed to do questions at the end, but I want to mix it up a little bit and kind of break it up. I'd love to hear if anybody here has had any successes in this self-learning space. Has anybody else had to navigate this? I saw you raise your hand. Would you mind sharing a little bit about it?
Yeah, we launched a company, a nonprofit, in March that does training for board members. And within 3 months, we have graduates in 5 continents using platforms like this.
Amazing. In 3 months, right? That's the other side of it, right? Speed matters, right? We can't be 6, 12, 18 months. And it's totally possible, right? With intentionality and with dedication to it. I mean, there's on Udemy, there's artificial intelligence A to Z, right? In 20 hours, every one of you could be certified in artificial intelligence, right? The resources are out there, but we have to be intentional about it. Anybody have any challenges with, oh, please. Yeah.
We're being challenged by, we can't work remotely, we do in-home care.
Yeah.
But we did something similar to the house in the manufacturing unit. We have a training room that looks like a bedroom. We hire for heart, you know,
Yeah.
we realize we can teach the skill. And then we had to spend money on a trainer on our team too, who now goes out to the homes when training is needed there. So we've had to definitely adapt. It's worked out well.
That's awesome. And that's rethinking it, right? Both having the physical location and then having something mobile that can meet people where they're at. I mean, that's awesome. Any other thoughts, comments on that? 2 wonderful examples. Thank you. Because where this leads, and I loved your example, where this leads is to a conversation around culture, right? Learning and development is one key aspect of culture. And when we talk about change and achieving things, there's a key gap right now in today's world, and we'll call it the trust gap. This sudden transition has revealed something about organizations, that most companies fail in building trusting working relationships. I don't mean to throw anybody under the bus, but I've worked with executives, early on in my career where I remember they said, "What do you mean recognition? I give them a paycheck, right? What else do they need?" And, nothing wrong with that, right? That was just the older, traditional mentality, right? We pay them to do a job, they do the job. Well, there's a survey done by Edelman of 33,000 people across 28 countries, so not just an American issue. 1 in 3 people don't trust their employer. Additionally, we found that trust decreases from the top to the bottom of the organization. So in other words, employees trust their peers more than the people leading our organization, more than the people making decisions about our future, more than the people making investments in us. Think about that when we talk about the mass resignation and people wanting to switch jobs. Is it simply because they're lazy or they don't want to do the job or they don't like where they're at? Or is there something a little bit more to it? Because trust makes all the difference. There's a great book called Speed of Trust, which I leaned on for a little bit of this. I'd highly recommend it. But Harvard Business Review did a study that those in high trusting organizations, less stress, all those things I asked you about, less stress, more energy, higher productivity, fewer sick days, the list goes on. So we have to have trust. But how do we start to build that? At a macro look, I think there's a simple answer to this. So I studied finance and economics in college, big believer in maximizing profits and efficiencies and all that. But in today's world, where you're now competing in a tight labor market against a lot of other highly competitive organizations, we have to shift our approach. If you went to an employee and said the purpose of our organization is to maximize our profit to shareholders, I don't think you'd get a lot of excitement from that. I don't think you'd get a lot of folks wanting to jump in and be a part of that. But if you said something along the line of, our goal, our purpose as an organization is to improve society's well-being, well, hey, that's something I can get on board with. I mean, that's many of the reasons why many of us are here today. That connects at a deeper level. So there's a shift that has to happen. Shareholder capitalism got us a long way, and we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Shareholder capitalism has a lot of value. Efficiencies, maximizations, all that stuff matters. But how can we translate that into something where all stakeholders matters? ESOPs are a big deal right now. Employee stock option programs, where employees can become owners in the business. You'll find that many of those organizations are high performing because it gives people skin in the game. And it connects at a deeper level, and it shows trust, right? It shows that we're not just out to make a buck. We're out to help, and everybody can win in that. Has anybody had any success or challenges in the trust space? Anybody doing anything innovative or exciting to try to build trust with their people? Or having challenges? Or aware that there's a trust gap? Well, we'll move to 3. So redefining workplace. So I'm not going to overload you with data on this one because we're all well aware of the trends. I think it was something like 70% of people moved to remote. But what did happen in this is we all realized what was possible, right? We found out, oh, you can continue working in a fully remote environment. Oh, I can shift most of my workforce and still deliver productivity at high levels. And on the flip side of that, employees realized, oh, I can still get my job done if I take my kids to school. If I spend that extra half an hour, 45 minutes in the morning working out or taking care of myself, or I don't need to deal with that commute anymore. I mean, how many of you miss all the traffic, right? I mean, it's one of those things that's great. Why would I give that up? So there's a flexibility. While it became more common, it's going to continue, right? We've realized what's possible. The line between work and personal life has really blurred. We're integrated. We're all in. I mean, my phone, I'll be doing work at 11 o'clock sometimes, right? Or at 10 in the morning, right? Just depending on what the work day brings. That is our new normal. It's no longer about hours. I mean, in a family business, so I'm in a family business. My mother founded when I first came in, that was one of the biggest things. You better be here 8 to 5. That's how we do things around here. Well, what if I finish the work in 4 hours instead of 5 hours? Do I need to sit here and fiddle around and figure something out? There's new ways to think about it. How do we optimize what we're doing? Because there's a few different aspects to it. While, it makes sense to say, remote work, everybody loves remote work. Well, there's some implications to that. So 66% of leaders are saying they're considering redesigning office space for hybrid work. What does that mean? Has anybody in here have office space that they've had to repurpose for something else given the new pandemic? Because there's a lot of empty office space out there right now. Because we moved our workforce fully remote, and now my intention is not to bring people back, but to use it for social events, lunches, trainings, social environments where you build trust and relationship, where the focus isn't productivity, because you can do that at home. You can do that on your own time. The focus, when we show up as a team together, is on relationship building, is on getting to know each other. How can we work better as a team? How do you optimize a space to go from a cubicle office environment to a social environment that engages folks? Additionally, and remote work's here to stay because the majority of employees like it. We all know that. But the flip side of that is 67% of that, that 100% that was there, still want more in-person collaboration, right? So while there is this trend towards, remote work's great, it's so easy, I still want to see people, I still want to interact, right? How do we bridge those gaps? There's no single answer to that question. There's a lot of different ways to do that. But I always come back to this simple hierarchy. Many of you probably recognize this as Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs. Physiological and safety needs, organizations have done pretty well with that over time, right? Safe working environment, effective compensation, you can pay your bills, put food on the table, keep a roof over your head. The organizations of the future are the ones that understand how to live here. Because some of the biggest problems in our workforces aren't these, they're these. Loneliness, mental health problems, anxiety, depression, all at record highs because people look in the future and they don't know where it's going. It's so crazy, to put it simply, all the different facets. We as organization, as leaders, and not even business, right? You can just set business aside. We as leaders have to understand how we can help folks move up this. What role does an organization play in love and belonging? What role does an organization play in your own self-esteem and self-actualization? So the future is less about paying good wages, but it's more about growing people into their fullest. And I'll bring it home on what I think is one of the best slogans I've seen for an organization, service above self. I think it really resonated with me when I was thinking about this, because in today's world, when you talk about that old model of maximizing, right? Businesses out to maximize profit, customers out to maximize their value, employees out to maximize their compensation. We've lost a little bit of that. Corporations were originally built to serve something else other than themselves. And we've lost a little bit of that vision. And so in the future, really what this all boils down to is how can organizations be of better service to the people they interact with, customers, employees, communities, because my true belief is organizations are agents of change, more so than government, more so than some of those other things. Businesses can snap their fingers and make a change to 500, 1,000, 1,200 employees in a matter of minutes, right? So that's the future, and the forward-thinking organizations see that. So that's why you can't ignore that. You can ignore these things at your own peril, right? Businesses can, I think it was Google is mandating everybody return to the office for 3 days a week. What sense does that make, right? How does that help people move up this? It seems generic, right? It seems uncustomized to the future of work. And that's Google, right? People we kind of hold up as some of the leaders in this. So, I just leave you with that service above self is much needed in today's world and is ultimately what's going to be the differentiator as we move forward. So thank you all for your time. Would welcome any questions. Yes, sir.
With all the changes in work, what is the role in the future for unions?
Well, it's a good question. I certainly think, there's two sides of that, right? You have the union side, which is the collective bargaining, and then you have the Jeff Bezos side, which is we're just going to be the greatest place to work that you'll never want to think about a union. And I think both have validity, right? It's what's the most authentic. That's what workers are going to look for, because it's so easy to do a voice of the employee survey, right? I mean, how many of us have taken those and never heard anything again? So it's those who are going to be the most authentic. If it's unions, if they're going to back up their pledges and step up to the plate, you're likely going to see more unions, right? If employers aren't going to step into that gap and meet folks here, someone else will, right? That's really the premise of what I'm saying here is it could be unions, it could be a union of another name, but I do think there is a role for the idea. Now, unions themselves have a colored history of whether or not they're valuable, and you could make cases on both sides. But at a base level, giving workers a voice and having that voice be a part of your decision-making process, I think that's where it nets out under whatever name we want to give it. I'm not sure if that's a great answer, but yes, sir.
It struck me that Japanese car makers make infinitely more higher quality cars than American car manufacturers.
Yeah.
And is that because they've been applying all this stuff for the past 3 decades?
I'm not 100% sure. There's cultural elements there, I think, that go beyond the workplace, societal elements. Service above self is a big deal in Japanese culture, right? The self is not all that important in Japanese culture, right? It's the
They
business.
make a lot of their cars here in the U.S.
Well, yeah, they use American workers. And hey, the Ford F-150 is the most popular car in the country. So, Ford's still in there. But Japanese, because they really bought in, I think, to that maximizing efficiency conversation. But I'm not sure I have a perfect answer for why. But I would say I think it's cultural, right? That they see a little bit more, there's a cultural alignment around the role of a worker in that organization. You're part of something, right? It's not, they don't glamorize CEOs like we do in this country, right? There's a little more equity in those organizations in a Kaizen environment, right? Everybody's, you sink or swim together in a Kaizen environment. Thank you. Yes, sir.
My daughter's going back to work today after 16 months working from home. And her big concern is the interaction she's missed with her colleagues. She's not a member of a team per se, but she would interact with a lot of peers and mentors, and she's missed that. And I think you're right on when you say that these organizations are going to have to find ways to maintain that for younger employees because they really hunger for those kinds of relationships.
without a doubt. I mean, I felt it. I worked from home, and it was lonely. I have 2 dogs that kept me busy, but without them, I mean, I would have gone nuts. And even coming back in, there's probably a little nervousness, right? What is it? What is it going to look like now? Do I need to wear a mask? Do I need to stay 6 feet apart? What are those social norms now? And that, again, that norms speaks to trust. And that organizational environment, that's the opportunity. Businesses can step in and facilitate that. Organizations can step in and facilitate that in a meaningful fashion. Because, it's happened quickly. I think that's the interesting thing about it. The pandemic happened quickly, and now this return to normalcy, or whatever you want to call it, has happened very quickly as well, and we're figuring things out. But I think if organizations create space for that in a more meaningful fashion, because before it was work, right? Production, get the job done. Everything else was a little secondary. Now that's kind of switched, right? We can produce really in any environment, right? With a lot of different means. Building the relationships and building the trust has gotten a whole lot harder in a remote world. Yeah, yes, sir. Thank you. Yes, sir. I saw your hand go up first.
Recent Wall Street Journal article talked about the hybrid workplace and career path and getting back and getting recognition, and saying that the people that were in the office were more likely to advance due to their relationship with their superiors. Thoughts?
The question is basically that folks who are working remote will likely have a tougher time being recognized and ultimately moving up the organization than those who show up in the office, particularly because of the relationships that are being built. Did I catch the question right? Well, I think that's a fair statement. Right? I think folks, and actually Google is saying they'll actually pay you less if you're working from home too. So not only with promotions, but actual compensation. And that's, I think, the hybrid environment. That's why it's not one or the other. If it's just remote, that might work for some, but there's downsides to that. If it's just in or on-prem or whatever you want to call it, there's downsides to that. It has to be hybrid, right? And that's why this boilerplate approach is going to cause issues, right? Because it'll work for some, but not for others. But per your question, that's why I think there needs to be intentionality behind those relationship building activities, right? It can't just be those who show up get the relationships, right? Organizations, they have to bridge that gap. They have to say, no, we're having our Monday morning entry meeting together. Then you guys can go out and do your things. But then it's also on the part of the employee to proactively say, hey, let's grab lunch, right? Can we meet and chat? I know I'm working remote, but I'd still love to meet in person. But what you're talking about is a real thing. I mean, that's just natural human bias, right? You're going to be biased more towards the people you have the relationship that you see, out of sight, out of mind a little bit sometimes. So certainly a real concern. He raised, yes, sir.
I've been reading a bunch of articles about this and continue to. I just want to say this is the best summary of all of the stuff that I've been reading in so many different ways. The economics, the interpersonal. Thank you, thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. Appreciate that very much. Yes, sir.
On your book recommendation, Speed of Trust, who's it most written for? Is it written for the organization, the senior management, any associate? And is it also outside that organization, suppliers and customers?
Stephen Covey Jr., I think it was, wrote it. And I think he touched on a little bit of each of those. Much of the beginning is very much a personal journey, right? Trusting yourself. Like the first step is self-trust. And then he moves into organizational, societal. There's sort of levels to it. So at one point or another, he kind of touches on each of those. But the fundamental idea is the same, is that trust, if you build trust, things happen quicker, better. And he even actually talks about vendors specifically. He says, outsourced vendor relationships with high trust usually close 40% quicker, I think was one of his statistics that he mentioned. So I think he touches on all of those. Well, thank you so much for your time and for your questions. Appreciate it.
Bye. Thanks, everybody. Drive safe in the rain.